welcome. So thank you for coming. My name is David Sandak, and I'm going to be moderating this panel on impact investing. Since we have a modest size audience, I would really encourage, if it's all right with my fellow panelists, that we really make this as much of a discussion as possible and encourage anyone to speak up at any time. Just shoot up a hand, we'll get you. Karen, is there a microphone or? No? Okay, it's project well. And please introduce yourself if you do ask a question and share your affiliation so we're clear on that. So the focus of this panel is on impact investing. And I was speaking to Meg earlier before we got started, and it's interesting because in this space, this field has changed and evolved quite a bit, and specifically, this balance and difference between impact investing and venture philanthropy and traditional investing is something that is evolving and evolving pretty quickly, and the expectations on the part of venture philanthropists or impact investors has changed as the field has changed, and as I would say the savviness of the space has grown. So we're going to explore some of those topics here today. So I'd ask each of the panelists, starting with John on my left, to go down. Please share just quick introductions of name, who you're with, kind of quickly, in maybe 1 or 2 sentences, what your focus is, and in terms of area of interest and also kind of stage of investment. And we'll go down the line and do that, and then we'll jump in with a discussion.
Sure. Thanks. This on? Yeah. I'm John Parker. I have a particular focus in children's health, so that's my impact area. I run a single LP evergreen fund for the Investors Foundation here in Boston, called the Charles H. Hood Foundation, and we are looking to support companies focusing on important pediatric needs through the early stages of commercialization, where mainstream investors might not be quite ready to jump in, extra risks, smaller markets, etc. We look to help support companies through those stages with the view that they will then be able to approach those investors with a better return story, given a little de-risking. I've got a portfolio of 5 companies. I'm sector and indication agnostic. I have had a bit more of a focus on the device space so far. That will not necessarily continue in the future, but that's where I've been. When I talk about children's health, I will look up to age 21. Though again, there has been a preference towards the younger ages, particularly in the neonatal space so far. So it's a ton of fun. It's important work. And a great journey, so if you've got some in that space, please feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you. Meg?
Meg Wood. I am the VP of Business Development for Cure Duchenne Ventures. Obviously, we're interested in Duchenne technologies. We've invested in 29 companies to date. 9 of those are in human clinical trials. We like things early. Our intention is to de-risk, just as John mentioned, to bring in additional funders.
Great, thank you. Isabella?
Sure. My name is Isabella Zhang. I'm working for JDRF T1D Fund, which is a venture philanthropy fund wholly owned by JDRF. So our focus are looking for opportunities, companies with potential to treat, cure, prevent type 1 diabetes. So the area we have been looking at the investment definitely, because type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease, so we are looking at immunotherapy and also the beta cell stress proliferation and the cell source like the stem cell just for the allo transplant beta cell replacement. Also for the device part, we are looking at artificial pancreas related and CG metabolic control. Those are all the areas we are looking. So far we have 11 portfolio companies, and the past investment stage are from seed up to Series C so far, and most our investment are equity investment. But because we do have a flexible structure, sometimes we are open to do convertible note as well.
I'm Ken LaMontagne, I'm Vice President of Research at the Leukemia Lymphoma Society. We're the world's largest global blood cancer education, patient advocacy, and research organization. I run the Therapeutic Acceleration Group. This is a strategic initiative to help young companies as well as academic centers of excellence to overcome the valley of death, support their engagement in the clinic proof of concept of their assets. So we invest exclusively in the HEMON space. Delighted to be here.
That's great. So I wanted to start off and just ask everyone to share a story or an example. Think of this as a mini case study of when this goes well, of an example of an investment, a partnership, a technology you've been able to help move forward in terms of when a company approached you at a certain stage and with a certain ask, what was a good fit for your fund, and how has that played out and some of the lessons learned? So John, would you care to start?
Sure. The fund I run is relatively new, so I can't say I've gone all the way through the process with the companies in this portfolio right now in terms of reaching exit, getting solutions long-term to patients, which is our goal. But today we've been able to have some really good successes in terms of achieving those de-risking milestones. One investment in particular, the company had significant government funding, developed the technology, $6 million in, largely actually DoD, which is always interesting for a company that I'm looking at from a pediatric angle. But they raised me $1 million to $2 million in equity capital, friends and family, some family office, various things, and we're just struggling to get that to that next stage. We came in, provided essentially in this case a sort of late stage bridge, a bit over $300,000 to help them get through the stage, figure out their focus a bit more, do a little more proof of concept, a little more device development. The company ended up getting into the Philips HealthWorks program, just really helped them focus on sort of what the industry wanted to see from them, validate their technology, get them through some of the business things that as a startup they were just working on and trying to figure out. The fact that we were able to help them survive through that, and can I say they wouldn't have if we hadn't been there? Not definitively, but I can, with some degree of confidence, I think that would have been the case. Right now, things are going fantastic. They've engaged, they've continued to engage with Philips. They've gotten tremendous investor interest and are now sort of moving full steam ahead. They're not at the finish line, but for us right now, it's been a great sort of early milestone success, and that's exactly the place where I'm trying to be most helpful.
Great, thank you.
I would say that our most successful to date, again, it's not an exit story, is Exonics, and that was a new model for us. We collaborated with the scientific founder at UT Southwestern, Dr. Eric Olson, which I hope all of you have heard of. Most recently, there were some articles written about his dog data. And we provided the seed funding for that company creation. Again, this isn't about our return in this case, but really we found great science, we helped de-risk it, we formed a company, and we're able to leverage that network to get a $40 million Series A closed.
Great, thank you. Isabella?
Sure. There are a couple examples. In general, I think the success from us is because when we are doing, so GDF, the organization, nonprofit organization, before the fund started, they have already invested about $2 billion all over the world to support the research. So we have a lot of resources, not only the financial resource, but also the KOL, the investigator, and we also have a regulator team at Washington, D.C. So when we were approach companies, there are some companies, they have great technology, they want to pursue type 1 diabetes, but they don't have the expertise in this disease. There are a couple of our recent investment When we do the investment, we bring along not only the investment money, but also the team, the KOL, the investigator, helping them develop the clinical trial plan and helping them to do the animal study, connect with the rat investigator. Though there are several cases, we have made recent couple investment. For example, for one of the company, Squeeze, before we made the investment, their technology platform was only for oncology. But after our investment, we actually, our funding and support expanded their technology platform to move into autoimmune disease area as well.
Yeah, so, we've been around for, the TAP program's been around for 11 years, invested over $120 million. I've had a lot of success. I have some flyers here that you're welcome to, our portfolio and some bullseye showing the 60 some odd partners we've had in that time frame. We're mission based, so we want to change the standard of care and the quality of life for those who are suffering from liquid tumors. A recent really feel-good story is our investment early on, in the early days, to Carl June at University of Pennsylvania in the CAR T therapies. We were there at the inception of that. That has led to the first FDA-approved CAR T therapy from Novartis called Kymriah. We've invested with Kite Pharma, which is now Gilead, and that is in our bullseye of FDA-approved agents. So we have 2 of them, and hopefully a third early next year. So, but success is defined many different ways, but that's certainly a game changer in patient treatment. So we're happy with that.
I'm curious actually to stick with something you just said for a second. In that, so those 2 examples that you just cited are really compelling and exciting, both from possibly changing the trajectory of patient outcomes, but also from a financial perspective. Those 2 companies were hugely successful. So by both metrics, that was a win. I'm curious, when you were looking at these investments early, how risky, from a science perspective, did you feel this was? So CAR T, when you were looking at this, was this an area that you think now obviously it's become a really compelling market, but do you feel that you were early to the point where providing capital to a technology that was unproven, perhaps seen as really dangerous even at the time, maybe by some still, putting that aside, or kind of where, how did you balance that, or kind of what was that analysis at the time, if you kind of walk us through that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think the gamut is extreme. So at the academic level with Carl June, receiving grants from LLS was, struggling at first, this 20 some odd years ago. People thought this was a fishing expedition. So that helped him leapfrog and really do a lot of proof of concept studies early on. Our agreement with Kite was further along. I mean, that's a strong company, a strong IPO. We wanted to sort of de-risk their ability to go into 2 smaller indications, niche indications. That was part of their ZUMA-1 trial that they got approval. So for them, it was getting LLS buy-in and the seal of approval that we stand behind a lot of these assets for patient advocacy and patient education. We created a CAR T clinical trial awareness. People could call in and find out where they can go to obtain such a therapy. So, but different spectrums, early on, high risk, and then, the Kite example was sort of de-risk, but we wanted involvement in something that could change the standard of care.
So building off that last point, several of you have used the term de-risk, and I'm curious to hear from each of you this idea of, when you talk about de-risking, are you talking about de-risking from a science side, from a financial side? Are you talking about regulatory ambiguity? When you kind of frame de-risking, I'd be curious to hear your perspective of the companies that you're looking at, the technologies that you're backing, kind of where is that de-risking that you're looking to have an impact around? Meg, you look like you were ready to go.
Do you want to go first?
I'll let you 2 fight it out. How about that?
We can have a conversation. How about that?
Ooh, that'd be lovely. I'm going to take a break.
For us, it's really about the supporting the academic or scientist or whomever in achieving the necessary benchmarks to attract more funding. And it's about expediency. You know, what funding is needed now to get you through the valley of death, which was mentioned earlier. Because we are looking at earlier stage science, there's critical need there, especially in a rare disease space. Academics, are sort of, very good at discovering things, but need a little bit more support around company creation and pushing it out to even considering commercialization. So really, that's another element of our de-risking.
And from my perspective, it's similar, sort of the list that you talked about, David, all of the above. Every situation, I mean, we invest at the seed stage. Startup companies at these early stages, they all have things they have to work on, but I find that it's different across every company. Sometimes you have a very experienced entrepreneur, sometimes you have a less experienced entrepreneur who needs more help there. Sometimes the science has been more fully developed through government or other grant funding. Sometimes it's more of a made in the garage device, but it can still be meaningful when it comes to helping kids. And so that I'm focused on really looking at the end result, figuring out if there's something real here. It's always a holistic process, but figuring out if it's real and what are the things that need to be brought in to try to get this solution to market. And it varies every time. It could be regulatory, it could be figuring out how to do the trial, it could be just basic business model, it could be sales and distribution much further down the road. And I will look at all of it and try to figure out if there are enough pieces in place and then which are the ones to tackle to do that de-risk.
Great, thank you.
Ditto.
Wow. I love the succinct.
It's a conversation, not a debate.
Yeah.
Lovely. Just because you have an opportunity to speak doesn't mean you have to.
Well, do you mind me adding
No,
an
please.
asterisk? I'm sorry. I just want to make sure that I do highlight that one of our main concerns or objectives is to cure Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And that is always highlighted for us. I never want to sound too skewed toward returns or something other than our mission, which is treating and curing.
Yeah, so let's dig into that for a minute. No, please, that was great. I'm curious to actually dig into that last point a little bit further. So I'd be curious to hear from the folks assembled. To what extent, how have you come to balance your mission focus versus return? And in our experience, what we've seen is, especially where we've had a challenge, is when we've made investments in companies, where then the science or technology or opportunities take them elsewhere that is really outside of our mission focus. And just kind of thinking, hearing some kind of thoughts and even some stories along the way, some anecdotes of how you balance that mission versus return, or if you don't, that's fine too. And how, in terms of your evaluation. Isabel, do you want to hop in first, or who would?
Sure. So my view on this, our view on this, we don't think there's. I don't think those two are. We don't think these two are conflict. There are yes and yes. Because we definitely want to bring the product to the market to cure, treat, or prevent for type 1 diabetes. But for us to reach there, that's a long way to go from discovery to drug development, getting to the market. For us to reach there, they need a lot of funding to pump into the development process. So we know we have to have good, attractive investment to bring more private investors to invest along with us, to have enough money to continue support the program until it successful goes into the market. So when we make the investment, of course, they need to fit into the mission criteria. But we also want to make sure those are attractive investment. There are other deep pocket investors who invest along with us to bring the product from now to a long development process, bring it to the market.
Great. Can you want to share?
Yeah, so we always struggle on what we call mission versus margin. Not all deals are going to get an ROI, and if it's mission based, that's our prerogative, and that's what we set out to do. There are times when success breeds, a commitment to try to get returns, to make this an evergreen-like fund to feed the engine. Capital comes from donors like you and I, and so that's the majority of funding that we receive, so we have to be diligent about that. But we do ask for some return through the biotech companies because we're supporting it, we're trying to de-risk their process. For the academics, we'll look for something at the back end if something comes to fruition, some intellectual property, which we don't own. But we like to see that get passed off. But we take risks and things happen, serendipitously. We took a risk on Celator, an agent that was a reformulation used in AML. They got bought by Jazz Pharmaceuticals, so it was a huge transaction. It had a great ROI for us, but we weren't even looking for that. So that feeds our engine.
Great. John?
The way we think about it is we want commercial success. Everything's definitely a commercial deal. We invest for outcomes, though, not returns. Philosophically, we believe that in order to achieve outcomes, we need, and to achieve them sustainably and at scale, that requires commercial success. There may be examples that are outside of that, but that's the bulk of what we think we can handle out there and what we're looking for. So while I probably won't get top tier venture capital returns, top quartile, I expect we'll do fairly well, and we're looking for that because we are very much focused on reaching a large number of patients, given the population. Pediatrics, it could be a small subset out there that we're addressing with a particular issue, but we do want to tackle that population set comprehensively and do it sustainably, and that requires commercial success.
Yeah, I mean, same as all of my fellow panelists have said. I mean, just to sort of point out something we were talking about earlier, we've had deals fall apart, because we're cheap money, but not free money, correct? So, I think that just that, highlighting that is that we've had disappointments in our deal negotiation. We are actually negotiating. We have term sheets. We're very similar looking to traditional VC funding experience. So we always prioritize mission when we're seeking science. When we're doing the negotiations, it does sometimes come down to terms.
So as you look at terms and structure, I'd be curious to hear from the panelists, kind of just let's get into the nitty-gritty to maybe help some folks in the audience who might be curious or wanting to reach out to some of these types of groups. If you're willing to share your deal structure, general terms, kind of broad-based, are you investing with a convertible note? Are you doing direct equity? Are you doing recoverable grant agreements? If so, kind of what are your milestone triggers? Kind of how does it actually work? Like what does it look like for you? Because this is, and I'd be also curious to hear how that process or terms or what you've asked for, building off of what Meg just said, has changed and evolved over time. So I imagine, Ken, for example, over the $120 million invested in 11 years, I imagine a deal that you do today looks fairly different from a deal you did a decade ago, as you probably as an organization learned and evolved and grown. So I'd be curious to hear from everyone kind of, how that evolution process has worked and just really kind of nuts and bolts. Like what are the tools of the trade that you tend to use? Does anyone particularly want to jump in first?
Easy for me. Convertible notes. That's what we do. We're early.
That's easy.
It's easy. We do them as program-related investments, so we do have some terms in there in terms of use of proceeds. If you've got a company that, say, if you're doing a pediatric indication alongside an adult indication, it's possible that we might look at that. Our money's going to go to the pediatric side, the clinical study, that research, whatever it is. So we will have use of proceeds in there, but otherwise it's a very traditional-looking convertible note.
So you're blending a convertible note still with a string attached of a program-related investment where the money is restricted for use around a program area that focuses on your mission, essentially.
Correct.
Got it.
Yeah, we use the same model. Recently, we've invested in a slate of projects later than convertible note. We've done some Series B, and in one case that hasn't been announced yet, Series C. In those cases, there's been obviously other folks in the round, and those terms have been preset. Where we do negotiate in those opportunities is protecting the Duchenne pipeline as best we can with our money, and or prioritizing the Duchenne pipeline with our money.
And are you participating in later funding rounds and providing significant amounts of capital at that stage as part of the round? Or is that basically, being as Ken had mentioned, that good housekeeping seal of approval and just kind of going along for, I'm not saying just going along for the ride, because I know you're investing, but just showing that there's still support of your group, or how would you say that shook out?
Yeah, each has their own story, so it's hard to answer specifics, but basically we've identified gaps and we went after companies that we could find, the best companies that we could find, and tried to negotiate terms, which in these cases was successful. Specifically looking at the drug discovery landscape, now that we have an FDA-approved drug and for ongoing gene therapy trials right now. We wanted to evaluate the next step, and so that's why there was a later stage effort in those company investments.
Sure. So far, majority of our investment are equity investment. Since the fund started last year, January, so there are a couple investment because we came in between rounds. For that scenario, we start with a convertible note. Because we view our role as a catalytic investment. So when we make the investment, we actually prefer there are big, deep pocket investors to invest along, so to promote the program moving forward more. And normally our investment, first check size is so far the past investments are from 1 to 3 million. And we do reserve money for the future rounds. Currently, about every company probably we reserve $6-8 million, but that's as the fund grow, this may be flexible change as well. When about the term sheet part, because as I mentioned, we view us as a catalytic investment. Many cases, and because of our check size and depends on the seed round, if the round, especially for biotech investment, if the round is pretty big, most of the scenario we are syndicate, then we don't have the key term sheet already set. But because we want to, as much as possible, to make sure the program move along, not away from the type 1 diabetes, we do normally have another term side letter from our fund. We will require for major investor right or information right, board observer right, those just to help us to keep the program, de-risk the program, move forward, move away from the indication we're interested in.
So we want to make sure that companies that we invest in are fundable. They have to have some capital, and so we'll match their ask up to 50%. We fund anywhere from 2 to 10 million over a 3-year period, and we have a lot of flexibility in our term sheet. So it's depending on the maturity of the asset or the company. So we'll do convertible notes for early players. We'll do equity. We'll do a collaborative-like agreement, almost like an in-licensing. Again, we don't own any intellectual property, but we build in that flexibility for our partners. But we want to make sure that they're also financially stable. That's one of our key criteria moving forward.
Are most of your investments, or anyone can speak to this too, former academic grantees, or so are these discoveries that you've been backing even maybe at a basic science level that are now maybe further down towards the end of the translational end of the spectrum, or are you having companies come knocking your door that are maybe at an earlier stage, but weren't technologies that you had backed previously? I'm curious as where's that deal flow tend to come from?
Yeah, sourcing is quite different, depending on the development of the compound. We have some success stories where grants have converted into a TAP funding mechanism, but a large majority are just a lot of these one-off that we're investing in the innovation.
Sorry, what's TAP stand for?
Oh, Therapy Acceleration Program.
Gotcha,
Sorry. That's our venture philanthropy arm. So there are some good examples. One from Stanford, we supported Irv Weissman's group with grants that has translated into a company called 47. Very exciting asset there in the hem-onc space. So we do have examples of that. We follow that uniquely. I think our competitive advantage is that we see a lot of robust science through the grants, and we could look at them and follow them through our tab mechanism if we want them. But we get a lot of solicitation and a lot of different ways of where we look at this innovation.
As you've had folks approach you, Meg, I'm curious, when entrepreneurs or folks seeking capital are reaching out to you, I'd be interested to understand what are the common misconceptions in terms of engaging with you that often you find are common themes, and just if you could share them in the audience, so perhaps if they're reaching out, they might not have those same stumbles.
Well, certainly, we're a nonprofit, which has its inherent issues, and as I think a couple of my panelists have mentioned, we have to raise the money. So as much as we want our evergreen fund to exist, the drug discovery timeline is long, and so our returns are future-looking. But that said, if we're passionate about a project and we don't have the immediate funds available, we do bootstrap that fundraising effort, activating the Duchenne community and ensuring that an investment we make or want to make is funded.
Anyone else have a similar kind of misconceptions that you tend to have when you're talking to folks, or do you feel there's fair alignment?
Yeah, I think people are confused about NPOs, nonprofit organizations, and why we try to seek evergreen-like funding mechanisms. We're charitable, but we also have to keep the lights on and stay in business. So it's that's foreign to a lot of potential investors.
Well, before I open it up to the group, I'm curious if anyone on the panel has any other issues that they wanted to raise, or questions for fellow panelists, or be provocative and challenge each other, perhaps, or I'll be polite. Okay, so
Nonprofit world, everyone's
Yeah,
always
it's
very
super
nice.
nice.
Huggy. Welcome to the huggiest panel at Resi. Okay, so we'll count on the Velociraptors sitting among us to take care of their prey. Does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask of anyone here? Yes.
Question.
Could you please just introduce yourself and share your affiliation?
I'm Barbara Silberg, the CEO of BioAdvance. We're an early stage investor. Do your boards get involved in decision making?
That's a great question.
It depends on if we have you mean for the IC committee? We do have a separate IC, yeah. So the T1D fund, we have a separate IC committee meeting. So every investment decision, just like the format, just like a traditional VC, we go through the sourcing, and after we think it's interesting, we will introduce to our IC committee, and they will say, okay, it's interesting, we can move forward to due diligence, and then second time we will do approval, another IC committee meeting. If it's approved, that's when we actually can make the deal happen. Yes, we do have an IC committee, and those are people with investment background, and they are helping.
What's your approval process look like?
We have a scientific advisory board, and we have a chief scientific officer who works more the day-to-day, but yes, we bring forward investments we're considering to our internal network.
How about this? I'm curious. So often scientific advisory boards are comprised of folks from academia. I'm curious if you're having anyone do an assessment from the deal side in terms of looking at a company from that angle, less from the science side, but more just from market and potential return, or is it more? Is the due diligence more on the science side?
For us, the due diligence is more on the science side. When it comes down to the terms, we do have outside counsel who supports us on that. It's just our deal flow isn't fast enough or plentiful enough to bring that in-house right now.
Anyone else want to chime in on board level?
So we see over 80 assets that come in. We screen them, the therapeutic acceleration team. For those that we like, we'll ask for an NDA, and we'll get a confidential presentation. If that is going well and it fits our portfolio, we'll send it out for external review. These are experts that Yeah, and the company will provide us an inclusion or exclusion list, and we'll respect that. If external review looks positive, then we set them up to guide them to a TAP committee. This is a committee that's overseen by the board, largely made up of physician scientists, VCs, lawyers. That's sort of our stopgate. That's a decision, yes or no, based largely on the science and some on the financial, stability of the company. If that goes to fruition, then we engage in the term sheet and full agreement afterwards.
I think we've got an investment committee that is made up of myself and other trustees of the Hood Foundation, with sort of the final say. All the work that goes into looking at investment prior to that, because we're across so many different indications and look at so many different things, we really run an ad hoc process depending on what we're looking at, tapping into our network across PIs, business folks, we can be device development, drug development folks, regulatory folks, children's hospitals, really just wherever the specific need is with the companies that are pursuing things that interest us. And those are, again, it's a little hard to define, but these are situations where we see there's an important pediatric issue that somebody's trying to address. And I may not know what that issue is right now for the next year's really interesting investment. They emerge over time. So it's a little bit of I know it when I see it, but then we tap into our network to try to make sure that everything from the science to the business to everything else is passing the diligence test. When we get there, we do have an approval process through our investment committee. It's also worth noting that we sort of trickle the money out. We do about one investment every 6 months, and it's an evergreen situation, so we can do it forever. We are under no pressure to make the investments. We're not in any particular rush. We do want to get it done right, but we're also tapping into private foundation cash flows. My organization is a little different probably than other nonprofits on this board, where we are a private foundation, not a regular nonprofit. So we have an endowment and a distribution. These monies come out of the charitable distribution we make every year. So we're just taking a little bit of that, putting it towards our investment program every year. So there's not a big fund just sitting there burning a hole in our pocket.
Quick question on your structure. Does the private foundation that provides the capital in order for you to make investments, do they have other programmatic areas as well, or is this its primary?
It's all children's health. Most of what we do is actually it's grants to pediatric researchers in the New England area. So again, across all pediatrics.
This is a part. So the investment fund is a part of the portfolio focused on children's health.
Yeah. So we are all children's health,
Got it.
except that we have an endowment that is just in the market.
Got it.
That is strictly we manage it as a fiduciary, and if we could bring more children's health into that and get great returns on a fiduciary basis, we would. Those opportunities are few and far between. So.
To add more information, so I want to mention a little bit about structure of the JDRF funding and the T1D fund funding. So as I mentioned, our parent organization, JDRF, is a non-profit organization. So the funding they are giving normally at a grant format. They will also go through, it's non-dilutive funding. They will also go through external reviewer, just like people apply NIH grant. We do have a research team over there review and the external reviewer network. And for the T1D fund, the investment decision, we are all independent. So we have a professional investment team. Everyone basically all have either PhD, MD, and also our MBA business background and science background. And we also have a separate IC committee. So when we are making the investment decision, we don't have to go through the JDRF parent organization. So we are making the decision through the investment team and the IC committee.
So we're trying something new right now that we haven't. It's in the kind of formation stage, and I don't know how it's going to work out. It'll be interesting. So we're bringing in LPs that are people that are interested in brain cancer, mostly because their family has been touched by it. So rather than basically having, you know, the sole source of funding coming just from the nonprofit philanthropy, you know, this fund will have multiple LPs. So it's gonna be interesting to see how that changes decision-making expectations. It's allowing us to access greater amounts of capital, but obviously there are some trade-offs along the way. But I actually think it's going to be, you know, in terms of alignment and focus and making sure that we're really mission focused, but also able to kind of maybe be a bit savvier in terms of the types of deals we do, since many of these folks are fairly savvy themselves. I think it's going to be an interesting experiment. It's not a typical structure in the space right now. But the other thing I would just throw out there, I didn't share an example before that I thought that didn't come up, but this goes back to kind of the de-risking question that I just wanted to share. A lot of our investments in terms of de-risking is often repurposement of compounds that were developed more in a common cancer and looking to really try to find that proof of principle in glioma specifically. So we provided first money in when Agios was founded, and this company was spun out and formed to focus on blood cancer and AML, but since the IDH mutant gene is shared across many types of brain cancer as well, we provided the funding to kind of allow them to focus on that, and now they have, you know, several molecules you know, well underway in the clinic and approved there. So it's been from our standpoint, I think some of our most successful investments have been on the repurposement side, not even just in the kind of pure play brain cancer side. Does anyone else from the audience have another question yeah, please.
I've got a more general question, David, about, I'll call it the, how you characterize impact investing now. It's really general. My name's Terry McTaggart. I happen to be a Canadian. I like the United States. I've lived here. Our technology is certainly an impact one. If you define impact as the ability to change millions of lives. My perception is it's evolving, and it's not just not-for-profit. The problem, of course, for those of us on the other side of the equation is, who are you and how do you get hold of you? Do you associate with others? This is really, really important, and people sort of nod and say, well, it's not quite an asset class yet, but it's coming along and interest is growing and so on. So what advice would you have for a company that has proven technology, is not applying it broadly, it's narrow in terms of industry focus and so on, but has this capability, and in my case may bring some substantial foundation money from another source?
That's a great question. Does anyone want to jump in?
Yeah, so I actually spend a lot of time looking at this because I'm always trying to bring more money into the children's health space. Always looking for other folks who are interested in investing directly in the space. And it's challenging. My perception is most of the quote-unquote impact world out there is not actually that focused on the types of things you'll see at this conference, healthcare, although it's all impact. When you're getting into it, with every particular case, there's a set of impact investors for you, and it's a different one for the next person. And that's why it's a little hard to define it as an asset class. Most of what you see out there is marketing hype. It's Wall Street being able to throw a tag on it so they can, you know, get some buzz, get some more money in. Yeah, sure, we're socially conscious, but yeah. The folks that you're interested in, I believe, are those who have either a direct connection to what you're trying to deal with, or occasionally you can find folks more broadly interested in sort of a healthcare area. It depends on what it is. Again, children's health, for example, I see a lot of folks out there who are very interested in specific indications. And when I'm looking at a particular investment, I can find folks interested in what they're doing. When it comes to children's health broadly, it's very difficult because most of the investors are interested in one indication. It's what's touched their family. So to go beyond that's tricky. I think it's an emerging area though, particularly family office side, where they're not constrained by fiduciary rules. So it's out there, but it's hard.
Yeah, I agree.
I think you also brought up a great question we probably should have started the panel with, which is defining impact investing. And so maybe it's a great place, since we're in the last couple minutes, to close, of just, if anyone also wants to answer the specific question, but also going, back to kind of defining impact investing and kind of, as you referenced, the field is evolving, growing, and changing. Kind of, what do you see over the horizon in terms of that understanding and definition of impact investing? Maybe we'll just run down the line, and then we'll adjourn.
No, so it's a good question. I think impact investing is, now being taught at the MBA level. It's a buzzword, like John mentioned. So there's some similarities, certainly, with venture philanthropy, but I think venture philanthropy has been around longer, and we're more passionate about the social cause. A lot of us are specific for the diseases that we try to raise funding for. So, but we're also trying to be impactful, so that there's definitely similarities there. What's in the horizon is, I wish we had a crystal ball and can predict what's the next greatest, HEMONC asset. We follow things early, and we have a wonderful network of KOLs and thought leaders that help guide our decision making, and we take risks like everyone else in the game.
Yes, so when we are seeing impact investing, we think at the end of the day, we want to cure the product to the patient. And that's the impact we want to make. Then everything else just a tool to help us get there. So when we're talking about the venture philanthropy, I would think that's more about the fund structure, like the evergreen or the LP, which are donors. They don't expect the money coming back. But those just a format. How are we actually get there long-term wise, actually bring the product to the market? I think everything is changing, but everybody are trying to find the best way to do it. In our case, as I mentioned, we consider return or financial we care. It's not because we care return, because we believe that's just a tool to bring the discovery actually become a product to the patients.
Well, that was said perfectly, so thank you. Yeah. But for us, we say venture philanthropy. I know that's just semantics for you, but impact investing for me conjures up images of green technology and or aid in developing countries. That's where I've seen most of the focus in impact investing, which is noble and great and should happen. For us, venture philanthropy is a better fit because it identifies the two things that we're working on: venture and philanthropy.
So for us, very particular to us, I'll break down impact investing, the second part. Investing, these are investments. We have grant programs too. These are definitely investments. It is not, we're not giving money away. The impact, I look at two things. One is impact on the patients. How do I find something that is truly significant? I don't want an incremental solution. I want something that will have significant impact with a major unmet need. The other component of impact is I want my money, I want our money to be impactful. If you're oversubscribed, I'm not going to compete to get your deal. My money's not going to make a difference. If you've got a huge deal and I can only put in a little bit of it, I'm not going to help you. If I can make a difference in helping you get from point A to point B, then I'm really interested. I want to be important to your process. And it's not just the money, it's all the other things we can bring to the table. But that's a vital component of what we do.
Well, this has been great. I really appreciate everyone joining us, and I'd like to thank Ken, Isabella, Meg, and John for sharing and being so succinct and direct and open. And I hope everyone has a really nice rest of the day and conference. Have a good day.
Thank you, David.